because World War III is a really bad idea. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show. It's Thursday, April 18th, 2013. Getting through the month here. Sure happy it's Thursday. Sure happy it's Thursday. Sure happy it's Thursday. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. 800-313-9443. Manny is sitting in our control room, twiddling the dials, keeping us out of trouble, and ready to answer the phone when you call on in. A little bit of a program note. First of all, of course, tomorrow, Friday, in our third hour, the lovely Lady Claire will be joining us for her unique perspective on the events of this week, of which there are a great many. And on next Monday, April 22nd, in our third hour, Richard Gage from Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth will be joining us in hour number 3 to talk about 9/11, current state of various investigations, their new publicity campaign that they're getting ready to launch, and so we'll be sharing a lot of that information with you. Now, today, of course, April 18th, is the anniversary of the ride of Paul Revere, running through the countryside. The British are coming, the British are coming. Actually, what was being said was the regulars are coming, the regulars are coming. And Paul Revere himself didn't actually complete the ride. He stopped to eat a meal and he got arrested by the British. And it was one of the other two riders, William Dawes, who actually completed the ride and sounded the warning, but I guess Longfellow couldn't come up with a good rhyme for Dawes, so he just handed the fame for the incident to Paul Revere, who had a silver company and a lot of money and good public relations department. Anyway, getting back to current events here. Boy, down in Texas, when they have an industrial accident, they don't fool around. Huge explosion at a fertilizer plant. We know that many of the chemicals used in fertilizers are explosive. Apparently, this plant had a huge stockpile of anhydrous ammonia, which is a precursor to the ammonium nitrate they were manufacturing. Fire broke out there. Firefighters showed up trying to fight it, touched off the stockpile of chemicals. A huge explosion, registered as 2.1 on the Richter scale, actually had a mushroom cloud over it. The explosion was heard 70 miles away. They still don't know how many people are dead. They think it's at least 15, possibly higher. Hundreds injured, 50 homes destroyed, an entire apartment building just smashed flat, just absolutely horrendous. CBS is saying up to 70 dead. That may be a little bit of overstatement for the shock value. The numbers are sort of floating around that 15 number. And it just, when you look at the photos, it looks like a war zone. It's just an absolute disaster. And, of course, the ATF is bringing in explosives, dogs. They want to try and find that, oh, by golly, it was another act of terror like Boston, because we've got to keep that terror meme going in the public. So far, there is no evidence that this is anything other than another industrial accident, which seem to be happening with more and more frequency in the United States of America as our infrastructure declines, as the money junkies cut safety corners further and further and further and further. And by the way, this plant was cited for a permit violation back in 2006, so we already have an established record that they weren't exactly dotting all the I's and crossing all the T's. But it is a huge, gigantic disaster, far more death, injury, and destruction than Boston. But the corporate media is still trying to keep the focus on the Boston bombings. They were having the church memorial for those 3 dead people who were killed in the Boston bombing. And we're looking at least 5 times as many people died in this Texas plant explosion. Now, this explosion, in the absence of a pressure cooker being found in the ruin, was caused by cutting safety corners. But we're not going to hear about that. We're going to hear terror, terror, terror. We must have anti-terror. We must have surveillance. We must have this. More about this when we come back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're talking about this incredible disaster. Industrial accident took place down in Texas. Just absolutely devastated this town. Last night they had evacuated half of the town because of the toxic fumes coming out of the remains of the fertilizer plant. The wind was forecast to shift today. They're now talking about they're going to have to evacuate the other half. It's a horrendous disaster. But the corporate media, they're reporting it. They don't really have any choice. It's just a huge, huge story. But they're still trying to keep the focus on Boston. even though far more people died in this fertilizer plant explosion. Far more property damage was being done. But they don't want to talk about that because, oh, that might impact on corporate America. It might remind Americans that there is a real problem with our various industries because of a laxity of safety controls and quality control and inspections. Now, this Texas fertilizer plant, in all probability, blew up because somebody cut corners on safety. Some money junkie said we can save a few bucks by not having extra barriers, dividing up the storage area for the chemicals, or we don't need this and we don't need that, we don't need detectors. We've got to save some money, make the stockholders happy. We saw the same thing with the pipeline pouring oil onto Arkansas. We saw it with Deepwater Horizon, where they were not required to have an acoustic blowout preventer, and the manual blowout preventer they were using was 4 years overdue for its regular periodic maintenance. We have a problem with SSRIs triggering mass acts of violence. These are real problems affecting real Americans, and they have real solutions. But we're fed terror, 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 terror. Pay no attention to those corporations destroying the environment and endangering human life. It's those terrorists you've got to worry about, and all of the problems of the country are going to be solved by waving the flag, singing the national anthem, and letting TSA grope our crotches. Pay no attention to those money junkies. They really have nothing to do whatsoever with the decline and fall of the American empire. And I think it's getting really very, very obvious that the corporate media wants to keep everybody focused on that terror story coming out of Boston for some political agenda. And they don't want to report on all these disasters and how they all go back to corporate corner cutting and a federal government that looks the other way. The Minerals Management Service knew there was a problem with lax maintenance on these Gulf oil platforms, didn't do anything about it. The Securities Exchange Commission knew Bernie Madoff was cheating his clients for 12 years, didn't want to do anything about it, but by golly, we're going to read your emails, and we're going to scan your computer, and we're going to listen to your phone calls without warrants, because there's a war on terror, and here's your 2-minute hate. Hate this latest terrorist creation that they've made up for you. Emmanuel bin Laden. Going to go to the phones. Wally in Ohio. Aloha, Wally. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind? Wally, are you there?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Now I can hear you, Wally. What's on your mind?
Yeah, you know, that bombing that at the Boston Marathon, I got a feeling the guy behind it is that Dave Oslick.
Okay, who's Dave Oslick?
Well, do you ever listen to that Johnny? He's got a show. He mentions your name quite often. He's got a show on RBN late in the evenings, and pretty much you can figure Dave Oslick's going to be behind it.
Well, I mean, I've heard everything else so far, from North Koreans to Arab Muslims to right-wing Christian fanatics to gun owners. Everybody is blaming everybody on this. I hadn't heard that one before. I have a different theory, obviously, so we're going to thank you for the phone call and let you go here and get back to the topic here. All right, now then. Yesterday, if you will remember, we went through this huge media embarrassment where they released all these photos of these supposed suspects and came out and said, we have identified a suspect, there's going to be an arrest, there's going to be an arrest, there's an arrest, we've arrested the guy, the marshals are taking him to the federal courthouse, and then all of a sudden it went away. Just disappeared into the ether. Huge embarrassment for the corporate media. People are still wondering what the heck happened with that. Today, the FBI came out and said they've identified 2 new suspects from the photos and videos along the Boston Marathon route. Only this time, they're not releasing them. I guess they kind of still feeling a little bit bruised about how easy it was to discredit yesterday's photos. Now, the New York Post is claiming they have the photos, and they published them, of 2 Middle Eastern-looking gentlemen. And so what we're looking at here in this latest attempt to try and frame some convenient target for these bombings, the FBI has these new patsies, excuse me, persons of interest, and they even admit there is no evidence they had anything to do with the crime. They were just seen in the crowd, and they look right. In other words, they look Middle Eastern. That's the only thing they have for saying, we want to talk to these guys. And the FBI, again in response to the way the credibility of yesterday's photos were shredded here on air, are not releasing the new photos to the public. But the New York Post is pretty sure they have the right persons of interest because, after all, they look right. In other words, they look Middle Eastern. That's basically the entire case they're presenting today, that we have new suspects and new whatever. And again, looking at the photos put out by the New York Post, these two individuals are making no effort to conceal their faces. One guy, no sunglasses, no hat, face up in the open. No sense of concealment. And if you're a bomber in that kind of an environment, you know there's thousands of cameras all around you. And you look at this crowd that these two people are in, and a lot of people are wearing sunglasses. It wouldn't have been usual or questionable that they were wearing sunglasses. The other guy there is wearing a white cap, and he's got sunglasses, but they're propped up on top of the cap. You can see his face. They're not trying to hide. And yet the New York Post is trying to claim, oh yes, these are the new suspects, the new improved suspects. Now everybody is trying to point the finger of blame in different directions, like this previous caller. We're seeing this story from Debka. Now Debka I normally do not quote. They are a known Israeli intelligence front. And they're out there saying it's a Saudi terror cell, possibly Al-Qaeda, behind the Boston Marathon bombings. Manhunt for the escaped suspect. And they're going on and saying that Debka files counterterrorism sources, meaning the Mossad, can disclose that the investigation homed in on a suspected terror cell of 3 Saudi nationals, blah, 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 blah. Now, let me tell you something really common sense here. Saudi Arabia has billions, if not trillions, of dollars invested here in the United States. They are not going to risk having all that money seized by the U.S. government because of an act of terror. If Saudi Arabia wanted to destroy the United States, all they have to do is ask for their money back. All of it, all at the same time. The U.S. economy would collapse, and it would be perfectly 100% legal for Saudi Arabia to do this. They don't need to bomb a foot race. So somebody is out there still trying to sell the idea that those gosh darn Arab Muslims are behind this. Okay, we're going to grab a phone call here. Ryan Dawson. Aloha, Ryan. Thank you for joining us on the show today. What's on your mind?
Yeah, I'm up late.
I guess you must be.
Yeah, it's 3 a.m. It's all right. I was going to point out it was the New York Post who originally ran the story about the first supposed Saudi suspect who was in the hospital. And I've seen the photos of what they're calling the 2 Middle Eastern guys. And it's the same photos that have been all over the internet of just people with backpacks. It's ridiculous.
It is. There were lots of backpacks in that crowd. People have their water with them. People who are there to support the runners are carrying towels and, electrolytes and whatever these people are going to need as they cross the finish line. It's completely stupid to say that anybody with a backpack or a duffel bag is automatically a suspect.
They're just doing the if it bleeds, it leads kind of thing. I mean, they've already cried wolf once, and so I think they're just trying to give nice titles to get people to go read their paper, but I wouldn't do it.
No, it's a complete waste of time. The New York fish wrap. The corporate media, the entire corporate media, really damaged itself yesterday by screaming there was an arrest and then having to come back and say, no, there was no arrest. There may be more to that story than a simple mistake or goof or a propaganda feed. We're going to talk about that a little bit later in the show.
Yeah, you have to wonder who was feeding them that junk and why did they pull it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I have a theory, which I will be sharing with everybody in a little bit.
All right, well, take care, Mike.
All right, thanks an awful lot, Ryan. And, of course, that was Ryan Dawson, who's a major fixture here on the Internet. getting the truth out about 9/11, getting the truth out about all of these Israeli false flag deceptions. Ryan and I have been virtual friends. I've never met him face-to-face, but we've been virtual friends for many, many years, going all the way back to a story that we did on the lost colony of Roanoke, Virginia, which turned out it wasn't lost. They just moved. And so anyway, one more. No, actually, we're coming up on a commercial break, so I'm going to leave the next call until after we come up. Over at INFOWARS, they're also pushing this whole thing. Oh, it's the Saudis. It had to be the Saudis. We have to blame the Arabs for this. Is it not a just complete repeat of 9/11? Big Bang, blame the Arabs, letters full of poison going to various politicians. It is. It's just another repeat all over again. Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. And we have seen this program once before. Going to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And all of a sudden we seem to be getting a lot of noise on the line. I don't know if that's Skype or what's going on here. Now, as I mentioned before, the commercial break. Over at INFOWARS.com, Alex Jones, one of his major websites, they're also pushing this Saudi Arabia. And they've got a story, Obama covering up Saudi link to Boston bombing. And they're pushing this whole thing, the Saudi person of interest. And apparently he's innocent of anything to do with the bombing, but there is an immigration issue and he's going to be deported. And they're pushing this thing, oh, it's got to be the Saudis, it's got to be the rest of the thing. And they're basically towing that Debka line, trying to blame Saudi Arabia for the Boston attack. But again, if Saudi Arabia wanted to harm the United States of America, all they have to do is ask for all the money back they've invested here. And the whole system would come crashing down. It's 100% legal. Saudi Arabia would be perfectly within their rights to demand their money back. And so Alex Jones has clearly drunk the Kool-Aid on this one. And don't forget, there is a video of Alex Jones. It's out on YouTube. I linked to it from my front page, where he just says on air, I'm a supporter of Israel. I'm out there. I'm putting it out there. I'm a supporter of Israel. Well, he sure showed it this time. We're going to grab another phone call. George in Texas. Aloha, George. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind? George, are you there?
Oops, sorry. I just had to undo my mute button. How you doing? I was just, I have a different take on. I think this attack was a false flag because you had so many cameras around you, you had so much media presence and security. They had to have help in the inside, and I think this was a diversion because not only to try to pass the gun control bill, CISPA, and amnesty, but also too the day before. It's somewhere on Fox News. I got to find the link again, but. President Clinton, Bush, and Obama have been, by a bipartisan commission, have been indicted of war crimes. Mm-hmm. And that's a pretty damning thing to see.
Well, who indicted them? I don't know that it really carries that much force or impact. But obviously, during these horrible incidents in Boston and in Texas, it's an opportunity to dump news stories onto the wires you don't really want covered. And so there's a lot of that stuff coming out, and it's always a good question. What are we being distracted from? And when we see these big, horrendous stories and they're waving terrorists and tragedy and blood and gore at us, it's a time to start looking at the smaller stories further down to find what it is that they want to say they reported the story, but they don't want you to really pay attention to it. And this is now a good time for them to do that.
Well, I just think this incident in Boston, I just think, it was a government operations. Start to finish. And I just think they're trying to use this to further strip away our rights. And I'm going to the San Jacinto battlefield this Saturday to celebrate Texas defeating Mexico, and I don't want to see a TSA there groping us just so we can see a reenactment.
Oh, no. You've got to have TSA groping you, because if you don't have TSA groping you, we'll have more Deepwater Horizon disasters and more oil pipelines rupturing and more GMO crops destroying our food supply and more radioactivity all over the place. All those horrible things are caused by terrorists, and so we've got to have TSA grabbing our crotches.
Well, yeah, I could see TSA saying, we need to grope you and search you to prevent any more hurricanes from entering New Orleans.
Yes, we have to make sure that you have not concealed a pressure cooker inside a bodily cavity.
Yeah. I mean, but even looking at the pressure cookers, it's like they were blown in, they weren't blown out. You know, it's just kind of saying you need a heat source to make a pressure cooker go off.
Well, you certainly do. And like I said, the reason I don't have a pressure cooker in my house is when I was very young, we had an unfortunate incident with a pressure cooker where even with the safety valve, it let go and just made a huge mess in the kitchen. So I will not have those in my home. So, but again, yeah, we're seeing all these indications that some kind of covert operation was going on. We're now coming to realize one of the gentlemen who was the picture was showing a suspect where he's got this heavy black jacket under which it would be easy to conceal a sidearm. You know, the tan pants and the tan boots. It turns out there was a whole bunch of guys dressed identically on the scene. It looks, when they're standing together, it looks like it's a uniform, but there's no insignia. And we've got a photo of them just sort of clustering around in the aftermath of the bombing. They're not helping the victims. They're not looking for clues and suspects. And I just found another photo taken a few minutes later where they're all leaving the scene as a group. And we need to find out who those guys are. It's some kind of covert operation, maybe a private military group. It could be XC. We know that one of them was wearing a cap with the emblem of the Navy SEALs on it. But this group of people on the ground there remains completely unexplained. And we need to start looking at that. And, of course, the media and everybody in the FBI, they're looking for some convenient Arab Muslim they can pin it on, so we'll all be hot and bothered for war against Saudi Arabia. Now, who is it who would like to see the United States destroy Saudi Arabia? Obviously, Israel. Israel wants all of the main wealthy, powerful nations in the Middle East crushed down, broken up into little tiny fragments. Saudi Arabia is definitely on their list of does not get a Hanukkah card this year. And here we have these known Israeli shills out there screaming, had to be the Saudis, had to be this, had to be this. It's a complete replay of 9/11 all over again. Got to take another break for commercials. Those gosh darn pesky commercials are getting in the way. We got to take another commercial break here, make some money, pay some bills. Thank you for the call, George. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And we're going to go back to the phone. Sparky in Ohio. Aloha, Sparky. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Mike. When it comes to Alex Jones, if any of your listeners listen to him, once they listen to his Y2K report, him talking the night of Y2K, you'll never listen to him again. If my landlord wants to get me out of the house, all he has to do is turn on Alex Jones, and I was gone. And I think one of the best podcasts I ever listened to was you and George Whitehouse Berry together, and I'd love for you to get George Whitehouse Berry back on your show for a podcast. And I think a great interview for you would be James Traffickin.
Yeah, I would love to have James on the show, and or get him back on the show. And I do need to get more guests. It's just something that, unfortunately, in the press of time, I have neglected. But as I said, we're going to have Richard Gage on the show next Monday.
I think that's a great one. I think you should also, for the people that would like to send you money orders, you should give us an address on your website.
There is one. If you go up to the top bar and if you hit the little donate link, not the PayPal link in the right, but up on the top menu bar, it says donate, and there is a post box address there to which you can send any donations you'd like to send, or particular books or CDs, DVDs you think I should be aware of. Cupcakes, sweaters, whatever did you feel like sending on along.
Very good. I'll do that.
All right. Thanks an awful lot.
And get why don't you put the link up for his Y2K when he's telling us there are probably 7 nukes coming to hit us right now?
I'll have to hunt that one down. If you have the URL for that, just email it to me, and I will definitely put that up. Okay, and we're going to switch over to Tate in Michigan. Aloha, Tate. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike, if you're taking suggestions for guests, I got 2. Maybe somebody from the LaRouche group and possibly Jim Willey, trend forecaster. The reason I'm calling is actually to kind of back up what you were saying about Saudi Arabia kind of being next on our list. Saudi Arabia and China have teamed up to create a giant new oil refinery that comes online in 2014. It's in the Red Sea at the port of Yanbu. And you can bet that they won't be trading in U.S. dollars, and we're not going to get a cut of that. So that could break up the petrodollar OPEC contract, and you could see other Arab nations siding with that. And China and Russia may be involved in protecting them in the future and maybe break away U.S. contracts there as well.
That's a very good point to make. We're seeing all of these countries, they're forming direct currency swaps with China. The dollar is quickly losing its status as the global reserve currency. It's down to half the globe reserve currency. And you're absolutely right. Saudi Arabia is making these other deals with other countries, and they will not be denominating their oil sales in dollars any longer. And that's a really good reason to have another false flag attack, and this time it's the Saudis. And, of course, they were trying to blame the Saudis right after 9/11 as well. And you have to understand that Saudi Arabia presents a real problem to Israel politically, because Saudi Arabia does take a huge amount of that money they are making from the United States in exchange for oil products, and they reinvest it back in the United States of America. And that kind of cash flow coming in to support our economy buys with it a great deal of political influence. Now, Israel, of course, takes the other approach. They're constantly taking money out of the United States of America. They put hardly anything back in other than campaign contributions. But they want to have complete political dominance over the United States. And as Saudi Arabia's wealth and influence is growing, Israel's feeling very, very threatened by that. So Israel's goal all along has been to somehow sabotage political relations between Saudi Arabia and the United States, just like they did with the Lavon affair down in Egypt, where Israeli agents were blowing up British and American assets, planting evidence to frame the Egyptians to wreck political relations between Egypt and the United States and between Egypt and Great Britain. So this is the way Israel likes to play. They will go out and they will deliberately try and turn friends into enemies. And we've often heard that phrase over and over again, that Israel is our only friend in the Middle East. But if you go back and you realize before the creation of Israel, we didn't have very many enemies in the Middle East. Everybody was doing business. Everybody was doing well. And ever since Israel came along, there's always these attacks, like the USS Liberty, that was blamed on Egypt. USS Cole, that was blamed on Yemen. The Lavon affair, and on and on and on and on. And 9/11, and I think Boston is exactly the same. From the fact that the U.S. government didn't immediately have any villains to point the finger of blame at, I think this was another Israeli operation. The fact that we have these known Israeli supporters and known Israeli propaganda fronts pushing that Saudi Arabia angle, yeah, this just reeks of Israel from top to bottom.
Great. I'm quite confident a lot of foreign banks do not want to put American dollars into their banks and taint their values. When you're seeing, you know, we saw the LIBOR, we saw everything going on, and HSBC running drug money, and just a whole systemic problem. And I think that, you know, and we're seeing the gold start to move over to the east, that they just basically don't want to, they want to walk away from our system without a war, and I appreciate that.
Well, I certainly hope they get it, because a global war to prop up the dollar inevitably will go nuclear, because the United States does not have the manpower, the money, or the manufacturing to sustain and win a prolonged global conventional war. And that means they'll turn those little keys in the little missile silos at some point along there. It's going to be a bad day for anybody not wearing 2 million sunblock. And of course, ultimately in the long run, I see the United States losing this war. Now, to the money junkies, they don't care. They don't care which side wins or loses. Wars are just generally good for business because it plunges the whole world back into debt. So that's another reason why allowing this war to escalate is a really, really bad idea.
Hey, Mike, while I have you on the phone, can I ask you another question? Change gears real quick?
Sure.
Okay. Are you familiar with the LaRouche Group?
Yes.
Okay. They have a big push right now to create a new Glass-Steagall, to get that back in, to try to save some things.
Yes.
They also have another big push about Russia had proposed that the United States and Russia and China work together on an Earth defense program to start defending against future comets or anything that may attack the Earth. And the United States isn't even responding to the inquiry, and I was wondering if you've looked into that at all.
Well, first of all, with regard to the LaRouche push for a new Glass-Steagall, a lot of people are pushing for that, but ultimately, while it might curtail some of the wilder speculative behavior of Wall Street, which is what the original Glass-Steagall was supposed to do, ultimately we need to recognize that the core reason every single nation with a private central bank issuing that public currency as a loan at interest is in such trouble is that private central bank. And attempts to revive Glass-Steagall are basically dodging the issue. They're trying to put Band-Aids and control the system and somehow manage it, and the time has come to recognize it is those private central banks that are the problem, and they must be gotten rid of. The public currency has to go back to being a public utility, where it's in circulation to support commerce, to support the people, to support the nation. It's not yet another privatized version of a public asset that's turned into a money-making venture for the benefit of the money junkies. Those have to be gotten rid of. This is not a time for halfway measures. Now, with regard to a planetary defense system, I agree that it's a good idea in theory, but there are some practical considerations. In other words, yes, we can go on building more scanners and detectors to look for these approaching objects, and you'd have the advantage of at least being able to tell people to get out of the way of a potential impact. But whether or not we have the technical means to actually deflect an asteroid at this time, there's a lot of work that needs to be done in that area. And we could set up this system and we would know the end was coming, without having to look at that guy down on the street corner with the sign saying, "Repent, the end is nigh." But how practical it is at this point, I don't know. I certainly think further research is justified. It may be premature to start building a whole gigantic system based on a technology not yet developed. But in the long run, yes, I think it's a good idea.
And they do believe that Obama has destroyed our ability to develop new thrusters that could carry heavy equipment to the moon, where they would like to set up something so they have a different parallax, a different angle of perception, and it can come at it in a safer route and start kind of developing the moon more. They think we've regressed.
Oh, we certainly have. We certainly have. Having observatories on the moon would give us far more accurate orbital tracking for near-Earth objects. It would also allow us to do long baseline interferometry, maybe not optically with the moon moving relative to the Earth, but certainly with radio telescopes. You could get some amazing long baseline interferometry work by having a new observatory on the moon. Another reason I'd like to see us going back to the moon and developing a scientific observation platform is this idea of getting away from all of the radio noise and the 60 hertz AC, 50 hertz AC here on Earth, and set up an observatory on the far side of the moon that's listening for the power stations of alien worlds. Everybody's got their little telescopes out there trying to intercept radio and TV broadcasts. I think you're far more likely to detect an alien intelligence by listening to the huge amounts of noise being put out by their electrical generation and distribution systems.
That's why I called you. Appreciate it.
All right. Thanks an awful lot. So we're getting back to Boston, and we're starting to get, first of all, we're getting a lot of silly stories. Let me give you the silly stories first, and then I have an observation to make about where I think the real lead for the investigation needs to be going. The FBI is now out there saying they're identifying suspects based on people who were using their cell phones just before the blast. And again, it's a sporting event. Runners are crossing the finish line. Everybody's there. I would imagine a survey of the images would show a lot of people talking on their cell phones. The FBI is going down all these really dumb ideas. Oh, they're on a cell phone. They're fleeing the scene of the explosion. Well, as I mentioned on yesterday's show, I witnessed an explosion, a terrorist bombing of a building down in Australia many, many years ago. And guess what? People tend to run because they're concerned there might be a second explosion, which was certainly the case in Boston. So fleeing the scene is not a sign of guilt. And again, if you're a bomber and you have just planted a bomb designed to kill and cripple people, don't you want to leave before it explodes? I mean, anybody they've got on camera fleeing the scene after the bomb went off, that's not a suspect. The suspects left before it went off. And that's just how incredibly silly it is. Now we're seeing a story, this came out of Investment Watch blog, quoting WorldNet Daily, that North Korea was behind the bombing. That the pressure cooker filled with nails is similar to this underground group's nail bombs. They're just trying to point the finger of blame anywhere that they can. Boston police chief is now on record saying they had absolutely no advance warning that anything bad was going to happen. And again, that underscores the fact that all of this surveillance we've been putting up with, the reading of our emails, the monitoring of our social media, listening to our phone calls, scanning and looting our computers, scanning our tablets and cell phones as we go through TSA, crotch groping, naked scanners, all of that stuff did not work. Batted absolute zero regarding Boston. We were told we had to surrender our civil rights and protections to be safe from terrorism. The deal is now bust. The contract is voided. We let the government peek into our private lives without a warrant, without probable cause to save us from terror. They failed. So let's drop that policy right now. They're making a big deal over the battery that they have identified as coming from the bomb. It is a rechargeable battery from a company called Tenergy out in Silicon Valley, and they're saying it's used in remote control cars. So now they're saying, oh, it's a remote control. Yesterday it was timers. Now, these Tenergy batteries are not a well-known product. They're not something that you go down and buy at your local five and dime store. The Tenergy primarily sells business to business. Tenergy batteries are found in already built devices where you get it and you pull out the little plastic tab and it's already got a battery inside. They sell very high-end rechargeable battery systems. So this tells us that whoever actually built these bombs is an experienced professional who's buying quality parts. He's just trying to make it look like an improvised explosive device. Now, as I mentioned before, yesterday was a huge slap in the face of the corporate media. All morning long, they were teasing us. They've got a suspect. They've identified a suspect in the pictures. They're after him. They're going to go. And they arrested the guy. And they announced he was arrested. They even announced marshals were taking him to the federal courthouse. And then all of a sudden, it went away. We don't have a suspect. There's been no arrest. Nothing to see here. Citizens, move along. Jon Stewart last night was just having a field day, raking CNN over the coals for all their reporting. Because I was watching CNN yesterday as well. Wolf Blitzer was out there. We're getting confirmations. Our source says there's an arrest. So forth and so on. Now, I want to couple that embarrassment with the story we mentioned yesterday that Israeli police are coming to the United States to aid the investigation. They might as well flash a neon sign saying, we're guilty, 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 and we're coming to Boston to make sure they blame some Arab Muslim for it. Because apparently, last night, on the PBS NewsHour, they reported that the clerks and staff inside that federal courthouse were indeed informed there had been an arrest, and the suspect was en route. So we can rule out the idea that this was just a wild rumor that got started with CNN and Fox that went nowhere. The court itself had been informed through official channels they had an arrested suspect. So what if the guy they arrested turned out to be somebody's covert operative? That would have completely blown the whole story wide open. Remember how the Lavon affair in Egypt was revealed as an Israeli operation. Bomb went off early. They got the bomber, turned out to be an Israeli agent. Now, the government of Egypt wasn't going to quiet this thing down to help Israel. But we know the United States government does whatever Israel wants. And so it's looking to me like they did arrest somebody yesterday, and it turned out they had a Mossad agent in custody. Remember the dancing Israelis they arrested after 9/11? 3 of those guys turned out to be Mossad, and they very quietly shipped them back to Israel. So it makes far more sense there was an arrest, and it turned out who they arrested was a huge embarrassment, not consistent with the intended propaganda campaign. Somebody's agent, somebody's hired mercenary. So they had to let him go. And then to top things off, they have this code red at that same federal courthouse where everybody's evacuated. And if they're smuggling somebody out the back door who was arrested earlier the day, nobody's there to notice any longer. And I think that is what went down yesterday with this whole, we've got an arrest, no we don't, code red at the federal courthouse. Got to take a break.
Don't
And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're going to go back to the phones. We've got Steve in Virginia. Aloha, Steve. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind today?
Hi. Yeah, thank you. I was just going to mention, I happened to hear the other day another talk show, and the guest said that he had a source inside of Homeland Security, and the source told the guest that this was a diversion, as we suspected Boston, and that there would be more, to expect more of them.
I'm in agreement that this is a possibility, that all of these little incidents we're seeing is a run-up to something really big to get us all ready to throw our babies onto the bayonets of whoever Israel wants us to attack next.
Yes, and that's all I wanted to mention. I thought it was interesting. That I just happened to hear that. I know that we've suspected as much.
Yeah, what's really interesting, whoever did this, and right now it's, in my mind, it's the U.S. government or Israel, or it's another cooperation like 9/11. They had to be pretty desperate to try this stunt in the current skeptical climate. Post 9/11, and how, how few people trust the corporate media or trust the government. This was an act of desperation to try a stunt like this.
Right. I believe so.
Yeah.
Anyway, that was it. I just thought I'd make that comment because I just happened to hear that the other day.
All right. Well, thanks an awful lot for the information. We're going to let you go here. Now, Rahm Emanuel, new mayor, former chief of staff at the White House, is out there saying that the Boston bombing stresses the value of surveillance cameras. And we've got to have more of them. We need them on every single street corner, every room, every bathroom. He's out there just pushing this surveillance state again. But, of course, my response to that is, I'm sorry, all of these surveillance cameras we've got now did not prevent the Boston bombing. We were all told to stop worrying about privacy, because if we wanted privacy in our lives, the terrorists were going to win. We had to put up with cameras. We had to put up with scanning. We had to put up with GPS tracking us all over the place on our smartphones. We had to put up with all of that stuff because that would prevent acts of terror. Wrong, 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 wrong. The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different outcome. More cameras will not stop the terror, especially if it's government-sponsored, because they'll just turn the cameras off when they want them. And so Rahm Emanuel is up there. Meanwhile, of course, possibly goaded by Boston, the House of Representatives has now passed the CISPA Act. This is the privacy-shredding web spying bill. All your data belong to us, is what the government is saying. Whatever you do on Facebook, Twitter, Google, your own websites, your email, your instant messages is wide open to government monitoring and surveillance. And you know something? Not going to change a thing. They want to just keep you scared from speaking out. We'll be right back after station identification. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And a listener just sent me an email saying that 2 years ago, the head of emergency services at Massachusetts General Hospital said they invited the Israelis to come over and set up the disaster team to respond to these kinds of disasters, which means Israel had inside information about just how a bombing would be responded to. Yet another piece of the puzzle here. Now, as I've mentioned many times before, I have come to the conclusion that all acts of terror are false flags. Because when you are a group inside a country seeking to change the society, you need public support. You do not go out and do things that will anger the people against you. A third party will go out and commit an atrocity to blame on you to destroy your public support. That's what the FBI did at the famous Peacenik riot at Disneyland. They wanted to destroy the credibility of the anti-war movement in the 1960s, so they set up and staged an event that made the peace movement look bad to destroy public support. The Black Panther coloring book was another FBI plot to sabotage the growing sympathy in the white population for the civil rights movement. That's how they do these things. We have a story linked to the front page of whatreallyhappened.com. This is a YouTube video about the FBI plot to blow up the bank in Oakland, where they got headlines saying, "We've stopped this terrorist from blowing up the bank in Oakland." And the FBI came up with the plot, provided the vehicles, provided the bomb, provided everything, then swooped in, arrested the patsy, and said, "See, we're doing a good job. We're worth all the money we get from the taxpayers. We stopped another act of terror." We've seen in recent years all of these high-profile arrests where they go, "Oh, we've stopped a terror cell from blowing something up in the United States," and it turns out to be an FBI operation, where they set it up, they find some poor guys who are so desperate for money they'll go along with anything, and they get set up to be arrested. A lot of people are asking if the Boston bombing was another FBI-assisted plot that accidentally went live, or maybe was allowed to go live, like the 1993 bombing of the World Trade Towers, where the plotters had been infiltrated by the FBI, and the FBI informant inside the group requested Bureau permission to substitute the real explosive with a harmless look-alike powder, and the FBI told him, "No, leave the real explosives in place." This was reported in the New York Times. The government wants terror attacks in the country to scare you back into obedience, to keep the level of fear so you'll put up with TSA and Homeland Security and naked scanners. Remember, we had that audio recording of Donald Rumsfeld a few years back, where he's literally saying that, all the fear from 9/11 has gone away. It would help us immensely if there was another terror attack. Can you imagine Thomas Jefferson and George Washington in their campaign to kick the British government out, more specifically the Bank of England, out of the colonies? Would they start going into colonial schools and killing school children? Would they start burning down hospitals? Of course not. They needed the support of the public to bring about change. And that is why I've come to the conclusion that all these acts of terror are false flags. It's all theater to get you to think the way the government wants you to think. We'll be right back after these commercials. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And as I mentioned before with that earlier caller, if this is a new campaign of terror directed against the American people to motivate us in a particular direction towards war against more Arab nations, war against nations with natural resources, wars against nations that refuse private central banks, or to turn us against ourselves, to demonize the Patriot movement, the Constitutionalists, those who are concerned about the direction the country is going, that Boston, because there was no immediately presented villain, like we saw on 9/11, may be the appetizer for something that is going to happen that's much larger. Now, of course, tomorrow is April 19th, which is the anniversary of the final destruction of the church in Waco, Texas. It's the anniversary of the bombing of the Oklahoma Federal Building. We know in that latter case, again, all the hallmarks of a government operation, a designated patsy to demonize the Patriot movement, to basically say, oh, anybody who questions the government, they're the villain now. Then the new label, of course, is terrorist, domestic terrorist. So we're hearing of another one of these too convenient incidents. This is over in Wisconsin, where apparently 15 people were injured by handling this contaminated envelope. They don't know exactly what was in it, but apparently it was a severe eye irritant, and they basically had a 6-hour quarantine at this medical clinic. They got one of these envelopes. They don't know what's going on, and we're seeing this stuff all across the country. Of course, you're now aware that 2 letters were sent, one to Obama and one to a senator, that tested positive for the poison ricin, which is extracted from castor beans. It's a very, very lethal poison. If it's injected or inhaled, it is fatal. There is no cure for it. If you're exposed on your skin, it can make you ill, but is not necessarily as toxic as it is inhaled or injected. Now, interestingly enough, they've arrested a guy named Kenneth Curtis of Tupelo, Mississippi. And apparently he signed his initials to these letters, which strikes people as extraordinarily stupid. And it turns out these letters were both postmarked April 8th, a week before the Boston bombings. So a lot of people are scratching their heads about that one. Now, this Kenneth Curtis may be the same... no, actually, let me let that one go. We got a caller on the line, Kent in West Virginia. Aloha, Kent. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, aloha, Mike. I saw something the other day, and I just registered in my mind. I thought, wow. And then Joyce confirmed it for me when she mentioned nobody had written about it on the internet. But there was they had this event where this guy was fleeing from the bomb site, and they said, oh, he must be it. But then somebody said, oh, because his clothes were in tatters, you know, and shredded by the shrapnel. And then somebody said, oh, no, I was in a bombing somewhere, and I ran too. And the thing of it is, he had what looked like beachcomber clothing. You know, you've seen these guys stranded on the desert island for years and years, and his last pair of clothes, and his legs are the legs of his pants and the sleeves of his shirt are all shredded at the ends and everything. And it looked like he got his costume out of Central Casting, because he just ran across the street or down the street or something, and his pants legs were shredded, and his shirt sleeves were shredded, and there was no sign of blood, and he was running like, he didn't get a piece of shrapnel or anything. So I thought that was pretty comical, you know. I don't know whether you saw it or not.
Well, I saw a lot of those, and again, and I'm the person who was saying that I've witnessed a terrorist bombing many years ago in Australia, and people do run from those things. That's not a reason to suspect anybody of doing anything bad. The torn appearance of his clothing may be that he caught some of the shrapnel, but not enough to impede his running. But again, if you're going to set off a bomb that is going to kill and maim people, aren't you going to want to depart the area before the bomb goes off, lest you get caught in the explosion yourself? And so this idea that they're scanning all these pictures for people fleeing the scene, it's complete and utter nonsense. Whoever planted those bombs is going to be gone before the bombs explode. They'll be a couple of blocks away listening for the explosion, but they're going to be out of harm's way. And so it's a complete nonsensical situation.
Yeah, I think he must have been sitting in a car somewhere, a little ways away, and just read. When the time came, he just came out and sprinted, because the clothes just looked like a beachcomber. I'd just seen a movie, Yellowbeard, the comedy movie about pirates, and it just looks like the clothes you always see in the movies about pirates, how they're tattered clothes. So. Well,
again, remember these pressure cooker bombs were filled with nails and other shrapnel, so his clothes could have been shredded in the blast. He may not have been wounded enough to keep him from running. He may have even been in shock from the explosion. But again, just this idea that somebody's going to plant this kind of a bomb and then stay in the immediate area while it goes off and then run away, that just doesn't fly. That dog won't hunt.
Yeah, they said, well, maybe he didn't get away fast enough. Well, if he didn't get away fast enough, other guys that lost their legs, so he had his legs. So
well, this idea they're trying to explain away. He didn't get away fast enough. Supposedly these things were on timers. The new spin today is there was some kind of remote control using these batteries. They're thrashing around. This has turned into a public relations nightmare. Nobody is buying the official story on this thing. And everybody is looking for reasons to dismiss the official story about this. And again, in this post-9/11 highly skeptical climate, it was an act of utter desperation to try a stunt like this.
All right, well, thanks a lot.
All right, thank you very much for the phone call. Let's see, another story out in Arizona. Somebody sent a package to Sheriff Arpaio, which turned out to have a bomb in it. He was very suspicious. It was x-rayed. They determined it was a bomb. And I guess this can rule out the patriot groups as suspects in the current wave of terror attacks across the United States, because obviously the Patriot groups are very much in favor of Sheriff Joe Arpaio. Plus, he got some death threats from one of the drug cartels recently as well. Now, a very interesting or possibly alarming development has come out. Apparently, the U.S. Army and the Department of Homeland Security and the FBI are compiling lists of organizations listed as terrorist. And they're relying as a source on Morris Dees from the Southern Poverty Law Center, who is a known pro-Israel propagandist. And my website is listed on the Southern Poverty Law Center's list of websites you should never, ever, ever, ever read, or your nose will fall off. And so probably I am now on the list of the U.S. Army and the Department of Homeland Security and the FBI as a potential terrorist organization, which is absurd because I'm out here telling people, please do not resort to violence. Do not initiate violence against the government, because that's what the government wants right now. Another reason for the government to be staging false flag terror attacks so they can have Department of Homeland Security start to use all that hollow point ammunition they've been buying. But it's just another reminder that all of these databases and lists that they're compiling aren't based in any kind of reality. It's all politically driven. You refuse to give the government and the Federal Reserve a wet, sloppy kiss, therefore you're a potential terrorist. They have people on those lists for nothing other than supporting the Constitution of the United States of America. In fact, a few years ago, we had it on our website. I'll reprise it after the radio show. The FBI was printing up a pamphlet to give to local police departments that said, anybody talking about the Constitution and constitutional rights is a potential terror suspect. So they're just playing fast and loose with that terror label. Terrorist used to mean a real terrorist. Now it's just anybody the government doesn't like. Oh, they must be a terrorist. Anybody who doesn't go along with everything will say, you're a terrorist, we're going to throw you in jail. No due process, no habeas corpus, no right to a defense, no right to a trial. Once you're labeled a terrorist, we can just do whatever we want to you. So it's getting really, really crazy out there. Phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Going to talk about the economy a little bit. We're seeing over at MarketWatch.com, the leading indicators are showing that the growth of the economy is slowing. And we're looking at the numbers coming out of March, indicating that we may be going back into another recession or a continuance of the recession, whether they call it double dip, triple dip. It is still one long, gigantic decline, and all of it goes back to the incredible, insane volume of debt generated by this private central bank issuing the public currency as a loan at interest. By design, it always creates more debt than money with which to pay that debt, and that is why every single country that is enslaved to one of these private central banks are drowning in this artificially created debt to control you. You owe us all this money, therefore you must do what we tell you to do. Rule by compound interest. And it's no more legitimate than rule by divine right or rule by slavery. And it is time for the human race to evolve to the next level of civilization where we recognize rule by debt is illegitimate, and we return the public currency to being a public utility, to serve the public, to serve commerce, to serve the people and the nation, and not just be another money-making scam by the money junkies. Going to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Looking at a couple of stories here. Apparently, somebody was asking Janet Napolitano about this arrested Saudi that was then suddenly unarrested, and apparently she got very nervous on camera. And people are asking if, in point of fact, like the dancing Israelis, it turned out they actually had a Mossad agent. And that's why they had to let him go. Caller on the line, Chuck in Texas. Aloha, Chuck. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. I'm looking at the financials this morning and thinking, why aren't people paying more attention to this? Oh, yes, we had a little, crude, ineffective bomb go off. While right on time, the St. Louis Federal Reserve Chief Bullard is saying, we're going to need more QE because inflation is low. What about the hammering of gold and silver? It was becoming so apparent, so outrageously apparent, that even the idiots are starting to wake up and buy physical So that's, oh, look over here, look over here. If we weren't for this bombing, what would everybody be looking at?
They'd be looking at a lot of things here right now, and you could very well be right that it's they're going to use this as a distraction. The corporate media has been reporting on absolutely nothing but Boston and Texas, and as you say, the financial news is not good. The stock market is struggling again today. We're going to be talking a little bit about the gold and silver probably in the next segment, because the split that is opening up between the paper gold and silver and the physical is becoming too obvious to ignore any longer.
Let me make you a point on that. I'm selling $100 face value junk silver, get a little cash up for extra preps. I've got a dealer who's paying me $3.25 over spot to buy from me.
Yeah, we're seeing that all across the country. We were seeing it at the local dealer. We went in yesterday just to see what was going on here. Anybody who thinks you're going to be buying silver and gold at the depressed prices, that's only if you're buying the paper contracts. The people who have physical gold and silver are charging a premium right now well over those paper prices. So that there's this huge gap that's opening up.
Well, the dealers are willing to pay, over spot to get it.
Yes.
Because they can't get it anywhere.
That's right.
Great show, buddy.
All right, thanks an awful lot. Let's see, Apple stock took a major hammer blow yesterday because of declining sales. Because people out here don't have money to spend on the new iPhone 5 or the new iPad, whatever current version they have out there. Apple CEOs remain among the most highly paid in corporate America, despite the decline in earnings. And apparently they've been caught up in a new investigation in China for spreading porn. Now, we're not really sure exactly what that means, because at least here in the United States of America, Apple has a very strict no porn policy for all of the applications sold for the iPhone and the iPads. In fact, they just finally accepted an application from the Playboy Corporation, but it has a strict no nudes policy. So I'm not sure who's going to buy that with that restriction on there. But apparently, for some reason, China is very upset with them now, which is kind of amazing considering that most of these iPads and iPhones are made there in China, and made very well, I might add. Now, getting into this gold and silver situation, and everybody's trying to say, oh, there's no central bank manipulation, it's just the normal, the bubble had to burst, and so forth. But we know that starting almost a week ago, a huge volume of these paper contracts were dumped on the market, 400 tons, probably more by now. And that, of course, is designed to drive the prices down, because the gold contracts, the paper contracts, are basically blended with the physical prices, so that they're saying the physical silver and gold is selling for the same thing as the paper contracts, and they're not. We're already seeing that. I think if this was an attempt to spook people into selling their gold and silver, it's failed, as that last phone call indicated. People are hanging on to their physical. They're trying to get more physical. Asia is buying physical like crazy. Physical demand has jumped. And we're seeing this very interesting article coming out of ETF Daily News saying that the paper gold holders are fleeing to the real metal. They're trying to get out of the contracts and into physical bullion. So if this whole crash down on prices was intended to scare us into dumping our physical gold and silver so the central banks could snatch it up in order to cover their bullion shortfalls, it has failed miserably. People are looking at what's going on. They're looking at the very blatant use of these paper contracts to crush the prices down, and they're seeing an opportunity. And you should see an opportunity. As long as all these money junkies went to such great efforts to crush down the gold and silver prices, now is the time you should be buying physical. And more than a few people are commenting on this clearly unintended consequence of this gold and silver price smashdown. It has actually triggered, it's increased demand for the physical silver and gold. Got an article over on peakprosperity.com talking about the unintended consequences, that this idea that they were going to crush the prices down and say gold is no longer a safe haven, it's backfired horribly. And for these central banks desperate to get physical gold to cover their bullion shortfalls, the situation for them just got much worse. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And remember what really happened, just put up an interesting story. Apparently, MSNBC's Lawrence O'Donnell is out there blaming the National Rifle Association for complicating the FBI's efforts to find who planted the bombs in Boston. That's a bit of a reach. But like I said, when you have an incident like this, everybody tries to use it for whatever their political agenda is. And I'm sure the gun grabbers are feeling very frustrated. We've got this huge, horrible mass death and dismemberment situation going on out there, and they can't link it to the gun grab. And they're out there trying to, at the NRA, we had that actor-comedian, I can't remember his name because I never heard of him before, out there saying that Boston proves it's time to repeal the Second Amendment. Now, I know some of the gun grabbers are out there saying, well, obviously, we've got to have taggants in gunpowder, and we've got to register gunpowder purchases for home reloading. And I'm not sure that's entirely unreasonable. The only issue I have with the taggants is that they do erode your gun barrel. They already have taggants in explosives, so if somebody uses dynamite or any commercially available explosive, you know where it came from, who made it, what the batch number was, and they track all of that stuff very, very carefully. Obviously, military explosives do not have these taggants. And I would expect that if they put taggants in gunpowder, that somebody making one of these phony improvised explosive devices will simply use military propellant. Or they'll simply cook up their own. It's really very easy to do if you know anything at all about chemistry. And no, I'm not going to give you the instructions here on the show. Deal with it. Getting back to this whole situation with silver and gold. One interesting point, silver prices on the paper contracts are now basically at the cost of production, meaning the cost of mining and refining and processing an ounce of silver is now equal to what that silver is being sold for in the paper contracts. Can't go any lower than that. But again, as that caller mentioned, as we've mentioned from our own experience, as we're seeing reported all across the country, in fact around the world, those who have the physical metal are now charging a premium to buy it. You cannot buy physical for the paper contract price right now. There's a huge gap opening up between the two. As that other caller out there said, the dealers who are trying to get physical in to meet their demand are paying a premium over the melt price to try and get it in there. The world has caught on to this idea that this sudden, unexplainable plunge in gold and silver prices is yet another Wall Street scam to scare you into running down to your dealer or that little We Buy Gold place in your shopping mall and saying, here, take my gold, take my silver, take my platinum, please, give me some more of that paper and ink stuff. So that the central banks, which are desperate for physical gold to cover the bullion shortfall, can scoop it up at a really small price. And that has failed. And people are realizing that if you have your money in the banks, it can be taken in a Cyprus-style castration. If you have your money in the stock market, at the first sign of a major downturn, you could lose it all. If you have it in silver and gold, the value will always be there. And that's why they're scrambling to get out of these paper contracts and get into the physical. We already know a couple of banks over in Europe, a couple of brokerages have had to default on their gold futures contracts. We know the gold contracts have been hideously oversold in order to keep gold prices down. And now they've dumped even more on the market to crush gold prices down even more, trying to spook investors out of gold. Keep them in the banks, keep them in the stock market. George Soros, who's been buying gold with wild, reckless abandon, is out there saying, it's not a safe haven. You don't want that yellow, icky metal. It's really not useful for anything. It's too soft to make anything useful out of it. You just want to get rid of that. It's just another scam, and people, thankfully, are not falling for that. We are hearing even more reports coming out of places like SilverDoctors.com that the COMEX, the Commodities Metal Exchange, is approaching default. They're one of the biggest sellers of these gold futures contracts. And they can't find the gold. And if they default, they will invoke force majeure and offer to settle all those contracts for cash. And that's another reason for them to oversell gold contracts now and force the gold prices down so that when they settle their futures contracts for cash, it'll take less cash. I think at the point we see the COMEX default, the price of physical is going to go right through the roof. And because of this, and this is coming out of numismaster.com, physical bullion demand is on fire. That's their analysis. Demand for the physical metals is just right through the roof. Getting reports out of Japan, people are getting rid of their yen because the government says they're going to depreciate it to deal with their private central banking disaster, and they're trying to get into assets like precious metals. Now remember, over in China, they're telling their people, yes, you want to buy gold. You want to buy gold, you want to buy silver, you want to hang on to that. And our government is saying, nah, you don't want that. Yes, silver tarnishes, you don't want that. And, gold, it's just sitting there in a box and somebody could break into your house and steal it. You really want to sell all of that gold and get into that paper and ink stuff. You think they're doing that for your benefit? I don't think so. Apparently, the premium over melt value on $1,000 bags of U.S. junk silver is now at 20% and rising. So the idea that the gold and silver prices are the same for the paper contracts and for physical, that is now gone. And remember, over in Great Britain, they have started an investigation into the London gold and silver fix that sets the gold and silver price for everybody around the world, or everybody in the West, to see if that's been manipulated the same way LIBOR has. Of course it's been manipulated. I think the easier task would be to find one aspect of this whole paper equities banking cartel that isn't subject to fraud and manipulation. Seeing all these other stories coming out of major precious metals retailer, we've been experiencing astounding volume. So it's out there. Now, everybody's looking for why this all happened. And over at the Gold Antitrust Action Committee, they're pointing the finger of blame at central bank manipulation. They need to somehow scare you out of your gold. They need to buy it as cheaply as they can to cover the bullion shortfall. Because Germany wants their gold repatriated, Texas wants their gold repatriated, other countries are going to start asking as soon as they become convinced that the reply will not be a missile from the U.S. government. And so over there, Chris Powell, who's the co-founder of GATA, is saying he's confident this was a central bank operation. And of course, the central banks are now denying it. CFTC is out there saying no visible central bank activity. Another whitewash by the government. They let it happen and pretend that, hey, it wasn't there. Same thing the SEC did with Bernie Madoff with the loot. Same thing the Minerals Management Service did with the Deepwater Horizon disaster. They failed to do their job for the American people and then say, oh, no, it's somebody else's fault, really. It's the terrorists, those Boston bombers, they drove down the gold and silver prices. It's all their fault. Go hate them. The U.S. Consumer Financial Protection Bureau is indicating that the next confiscation in this country is likely to be the pension funds. We've been hearing about this for months now, where they're talking about forcing holders of private retirement accounts, the IRAs, the 401ks, to liquidate them, at least above a certain level, convert them to cash, and then use that cash to buy yet another government-issued, pretty printed piece of paper, a special retirement treasury bond. The new government-managed retirement system, forgetting we already have a government-managed retirement system called Social Security. And they screwed it up. They took your money, and that is your money in that Social Security fund. It's not the government's money. It's your money. And they borrowed it away and spent it, especially during the Clinton administration, and now they can't pay it back. The U.S. government is already defaulting on the American worker. So what are they going to do? Oh, well, we're going to have a new version of Social Security, and you will buy into it. You will give us what's left of your wealth, and we'll give you this little printed piece of paper that'll make you feel good about giving us your absolute wealth. Same deal they got in Cyprus when they took the money out of the savings account. They gave them shares in the bank. How wonderful that is. They've taken my retirement money, and they've given me a share in a bank that is already so broke they're having to loot their own savers' accounts. It's just open crime against the people by the bankers and by the obedient government. And that is fascism. When government and the financial corporations are aligned together against the general population, that is fascism. And that is not my definition. That is from Benito Mussolini, who holds the Olympic gold medal for being a fascist jerk. Now, one of the other things that is not being reported on very much because of the death and grief and sorrow and gore in Boston and Texas is Obama's proposed budget, where they're trying to basically get out of the mandated sequestration by coming up with a new budget that everybody will say, this will solve our financial problems. Good luck on that one. Obama's budget rescues the Pentagon. All of the mandated military cuts are gone. Where are the cuts falling? They're falling on you. Money for education, money for roads, money for bridges, schools, money for the USDA to make sure that your food is safe, money for the SEC to continue turning a blind eye to Wall Street. All of the things that you agree to pay taxes for are being cut. The government is taking your money and spending it on things you don't agree with. Wars of conquest, Wall Street bailouts, money for Israel. That's taxation without representation. And in that little tiny schoolhouse I went to school in New Hampshire, that was considered a valid reason to fire the government, because we did it once before. Now, speaking of the Pentagon, and we did talk about this yesterday, the Pentagon has requested more funding for Israel's Iron Dome missile system. This is a missile system Israel is building for itself and for export, and you, the American taxpayer, are paying the R&D costs. During Pillar of Cloud, this last Israeli incursion into Gaza, it turned out Iron Dome really didn't work. Mostly because those homemade rockets by Hamas don't follow a nice, predictable parabolic arc. They corkscrew through the air, they weave back and forth, they're not stable. And all of these systems, Iron Dome, Patriot, ballistic missile defense, are dependent on your incoming threat following a nice, smooth, parabolic ballistic arc that is predictable. And Iron Dome is ineffective against that. So, the Pentagon has requested another $220 million for Iron Dome, for Israel to get Iron Dome to intercept these homemade rockets. $220 million in order to shoot down a $40 rocket. And by the way, a reminder, as we talk about the potential for war with China and Russia, the United States has spent trillions of dollars on this ballistic missile defense system, which, like Patriot, like Iron Dome, presumes the incoming threat is following a nice ballistic, predictable arc. That's why they call it the ballistic missile defense. Russia's latest generation of MIRV vehicles are maneuverable. They bob and weave, they corkscrew, they swing back and forth, which means a ballistic intercept is impossible. And by now, I think it's a safe bet, China has either acquired or copied these maneuverable MIRV warheads. And so all that money that went into the ballistic missile defense system was a complete waste. And it means that if we do allow this war to go any further and we get into a nuclear conflict with Russia and China, Russian and Chinese warheads are going to hit their intended targets in the United States. Now, Russia and China are going to be aiming at the military bases. The doctrine of wiping out population centers has thankfully gone away. But if you're living in a city near a military base, which is everywhere here in Hawaii, it's still going to be a bad day here. Getting back to the economic news, more than 46 million Americans are living below the official poverty level. Obama has a fix for it. He's going to just lower that poverty threshold. Same way he fixed the growing radioactive contamination in our tap water from fracking. He just arbitrarily raised the maximum permissible exposure to radiation in your drinking water. Kind of makes you wonder how many of these so-called official recommendation limits and guides and the rest of it are the result of politics and corruption rather than the actual science. You know, it's okay for you to have this much pesticide in your food. Is that really okay, or is it simply what Monsanto desired? But when we see them moving these designations around to suit a political agenda, it undermines the credibility of every federal guideline safety limit that is out there. Remember when they discovered melanin was coming in imported foods from China, and they said, oh, it's horrible, they shouldn't be doing it. Then they found out American manufacturers are doing the same thing. And so what did they do? They simply jacked up that limit. So they could say, well, the melanin content in American food is safe for you to eat. Remember the 2009 when pigs fly flu pandemic? It was a pandemic only because the CDC and the World Health Organization artificially lowered the number of infections that had to occur before they could declare it a pandemic and get the news coverage and scare you all into spending money on vaccines, most of which wound up poured down the drains and sewer systems. We have more than 10 million working poor in this country, 47 million people on food stamps, and still Obama is throwing all of your money into the war machine, Wall Street, and Israel. No wonder they want to take the guns away from you. Apparently down in Tennessee, 24 workers for the Internal Revenue Service have been indicted on federal charges of theft and fraud. So, it's just the system is rotten from top to bottom. Going to take a break. We'll be right back. Join us on the air, 800-313-9443. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. Now, getting over to Europe and Cyprus. Cyprus is providing a good case study of why all of these maneuvers around the central banks are ultimately doomed to fail. Cyprus got into trouble, unpayable debt to the central bank. The rest of Europe is no longer willing to bail them out. They have crushed their people down under austerity. And it finally ended with that little haircut / castration on the savings accounts. And whoever is planning all these little maneuvers seems to forget that when you force austerity on a country, and all these public workers that are supposed to be taking care of the people and the roads and the schools and the hospitals get fired, they can't find other jobs. And your tax revenues dry up. And so even with the looting of the savings accounts in Cyprus, Cyprus is still in serious trouble. A week ago they were saying they were still short 6 billion, with a B, euros to balance their books. They have actually run out of cash on a couple of occasions where they literally have got zero in the bank with which to operate the country. Then they ramped it up and said, well, actually we need 17 billion euros. And today they're saying it's grown to 24 billion euros. And all these little maneuvers and haircuts and confiscation and foreclosure fraud and all won't fix the problem until you stand up and recognize private central banking issuing the public currency as a loan at interest is the problem. And because our political leadership are junior grade money junkies themselves, they refuse to look at it. They're going to blame somebody else for it. Oh, those people who bought houses without being able to afford it. It's all their fault. It's all the American people's fault because they're not borrowing enough. If you're not rushing down to the mall and buying jewelry on credit, the terrorists are going to win. And as I mentioned earlier in the show, when you look at the news coverage and the spin on these two disasters, Boston and Texas, where Texas, clearly more death, far more damage and destruction, and they're still trying to keep the focus on Boston terror, Boston terror, Boston terror. Because it's supposed to be the job of the federal government to make sure the country is running for everybody in terms of safety and health. And they're always waving terrorists at us when we have these very real problems with real solutions in front of us. Whether it is cutting safety corners at that fertilizer plant in Texas, ignoring machinery in these Gulf of Mexico oil platforms that is 4 years overdue for maintenance and fails when needed, broken pipelines in Arkansas. All of these track back to some corporate money junkie saving a few dollars by cutting corners. Look at what happened at San Onofre, where they found out the metal alloy used in the heat exchangers, which have now failed, was a cheaper alloy, not up to the spec needed for that use. But they don't want to deal with that. They're going to go after the terrorists. More about this when we come back from station identification. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And I want to reiterate a point I made in the first hour of the program. And that is, when you look at the media coverage, it's all about the Boston terror, we've got to have more cameras, we've got to have more groping at the airport, we've got to have more naked scanners. And yet these other problems, these other disasters, which are clearly far worse, this fertilizer plant explosion in Texas, you know where they are and what they probably did. They cut corners. And as before the break I was mentioning the disaster out in San Onofre, the nuclear power plant in California, where the money junkies who are running that plant decided to enlarge the heat exchangers so they could run more generators, generate more power, make more money. And they fibbed to the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. They said it was maintenance, so they didn't have to have a whole bunch of inspectors coming in. And the reason they didn't want the inspectors coming in is that somebody somewhere in that management made the decision to use a cheaper grade of metal on the heat exchanger tubes, which started corroding far more quickly than expected, leading to leakages, and finally they had to shut the whole plant down. And we have seen this kind of lax concern for safety all across the United States. Again, cheaper grades of metal in pipelines, neglecting the maintenance on the blowout preventer on the Deepwater Horizon. And we don't see the media standing up and saying it's time to renew safety inspections on all of these large machines, on all these refineries, on all these oil pipelines. We've got to make sure that nobody does anything with a nuclear reactor that's not above board. You're not hearing that. It's all, we need more cameras, we need more groping at the airports, we've got to confiscate the guns. I got an email from somebody saying, well, you know, you're rushing to judgment on the fertilizer factory because really they had no way of knowing that this could be a disaster like this. Wrong. Back in 1947, in fact, we're just a few days past that anniversary, was the Texas City disaster, where a fire on board a cargo ship carrying ammonium nitrate fertilizer exploded and devastated the surrounding countryside. We know these chemicals are explosives. They're used as explosives. The standard U.S. Army earth-moving charge is ammonium nitrate and fuel oil. So you can't say the people in this fertilizer factory, the owners of this fertilizer factory, didn't realize there was a potential danger requiring certain safety precautions. Like, let's make sure that any fire that does start is immediately put out by the overhead sprinklers. Instead, the fire was burning out of control. The fire department showed up. A lot of them got caught in this explosion. Terrorists have become the new Emmanuel Goldstein. We're supposed to blame everything on them, do the 2-minute hate on them, and while we're focused on the Emmanuel Goldstein, or Osama bin Goldstein, or whatever it is, the Arab Muslims, we're supposed to ignore the fact that major corporations are conducting their business in a way that is detrimental to the common good. Vaccines that are ineffective and harmful, SSRIs that are triggering mass acts of violence to be conveniently blamed on the guns. That's the real problem. We could solve those problems. We know where the culprits are, like the Wall Street bankers. But no. The focus is on terror. Pay no attention to those Wall Street con artists. We've got terrorists for you. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And during hour number 1, I was commenting about the new improved patsies that were being waved around as potential suspects in the Boston bombing, and how the FBI, apparently chagrined by how easily the credibility of their photographic evidence was shredded yesterday, had a new pair of suspects, but they weren't publicly allowing the pictures out. Then the New York Post said, well, we've got the pictures, and they put them out. And I commented on how here we again have these guys, and they look Middle Eastern, and that appears to be the only reason they were selected out of the crowd, but they were there without any covering on their face, no sunglasses, faces fully in view of the convenient cameras. Again, lacked any credibility that these were suspects, and now we're seeing on the corporate media, the FBI has now basically said these two gentlemen are no longer persons of interest. So they're back to square one. They have no idea who did the bombing. We do, of course. And we understand that, especially with Israel's police, they're on the ground in Massachusetts to assist the probe. They'll never get anywhere near the real bombers. They're just trying to find some Arab Muslim or some patriot or some right-wing Christian or some gosh darn constitutionalist, gun-loving, gay-hating, right-wing extremist they can pin it on. But at this point they have to understand that any suspect offered up for public view is going to be gazed at with a tremendous amount of scrutiny and skepticism and analytical thinking. We're just not going to say, it's Osama bin Laden's son, and we're just not going to take that at face value. And as I commented to that caller earlier, in this climate, this post-9/11, post-Saddam's nukes climate of skepticism, it was an act of desperation to try this. And if it was Israel behind it, they don't care. It's not their problem if the credibility of this whole thing collapses and the American people start pointing fingers. They don't have to live with it. Getting an article here. This is from businessfinancialpost.com, where they're looking at their new bail-in process, which was outlined in the budget outline for Canada for next year, about this bail-in, and they're out there trying to say that Canadian deposits are safe under the bail-in program, but they won't guarantee it. Leave your money in the bank, it's perfectly safe there, but I won't promise we're not going to take it. That's basically what the Canadians are telling their people now. And I'm sure the Canadians are out there buying physical silver and gold as fast as they can here. Meanwhile, the chief of the IMF, Christine Lagarde, you remember Christine, she's the one who's out there saying it doesn't matter if your nation's debt is the result of fraud and corruption and crime, it is still sacrosanct and you, the people, must pay it. That Christine Lagarde. She has been summoned to appear before a court investigating alleged corruption during her time as a French government minister. And apparently this centers on a scandal involving a huge payout to Bernard Tapie. And so it's just one more reminder. These people are in positions of wealth and power not because of merit, but because they are willing to do things you, the moral, ordinary citizen, aren't willing to do. Hungary is having to deal with some European Union fines for their financial misdeeds, and they're going to pay for it with yet another tax on their people. That's everybody's solution to the financial problems. Take it from the people. Take it from the people. The poor are always made to pay for all. We've got a caller on the line, Kyle in Philadelphia. Aloha, Kyle. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. I wanted to take a step back to the bombing and the suspect. I think at this point, I don't think they're gonna have anybody. I think it's gonna go unsolved for a certain amount of time, maybe 2 months or 3 months or however long, and then once it's blown over and it's sort of, not front and center in everybody's mind, they're going to come forth with somebody, and they might not even see them. It might be we had somebody pinned down in a cabin in the woods and we burned it down, and yeah, but we're sure it was him.
It could very well be they'll solve their political embarrassment this way, or another theory, of course, with all these other little suspicious packages and emails and all this other stuff that's going on. And apparently ATF is out there in Texas trying to find any evidence that this was another act of terror. There could be another big bang, possibly tomorrow on the anniversary of Oklahoma City and Waco, in which case they'll say, we have to launch an investigation to find these domestic terrorists. We have to suspend the Bill of Rights. These are emergency situations. It's basically a repeat of Hitler's enabling acts, where he had to be granted his extraordinary powers to deal with the terrorist threat. So I'm very, very concerned that we may hear another big bang tomorrow.
I think you're absolutely right. I think that the bombing of the marathon was supposed to be the prelude or the beginning in some sort of multiple IED or attacks culminating with a large attack, which was the clampdown. And but I think that because of all the photos and the videos and what's come out, they are so far off kilter. But they've already put wheels in motion that if they stop it now, if they stutter, they sputter, and it could all fall apart for them. And this could be a Waterloo, or it could be whatever moment for the Obama president, whatever.
Well, so it could very well be. I'll tell you one thing. As hard as the media is trying to keep the focus on Boston, it is very clear that this tragedy in Texas is far worse in terms of loss of life, injury, loss of property. So if either Israel or the U.S. or both are planning a new Big Bang as the main course following the Boston appetizer, they're going to have to make it far more spectacular than Texas in order to take the media focus back onto itself.
Well, I think I think everything with Boston is actually pushing for a larger attack. And I honestly think the next attack is going to be some sort of nuclear device, because if there's a nuclear device that goes off, there's no cameras left. There's no film left. There's nobody taking photos. There's no eyewitnesses. The only thing that is left is whatever story they want to project. This will be the last time you have a small bombing like this, because they can't afford to have all of these loose ends and these,
Yeah, but
videos,
don't forget. Following this nuclear attack, we can be assured that there will be these magic passports, completely untouched, unscorched, unburned, pointing the finger of blame at Saudi Arabia or whoever else is going to be blamed for this thing.
And I firmly believe that they write the story before it happened. They say, well, there was this happened at this place, and it was this person who's a member of this organization, and this is how we know this. And then any evidence or anything that contradicts what they want the storyline to be, they either just omit it, they call it to be conspiracy, or they just act like it never, ever happened. No, that's a lie. That's impossible. So, absolutely. They're making up. If they're going to do an attack, if they're going to go big, then they're already making up the passports as we speak, and they're getting the passes ready.
I'm sure that they are, but again, this situation yesterday where they announced they had an arrest and then they had to back off has already destroyed their credibility. When you're dealing with an American public that is already intensely distrustful of the government, intensely distrustful of the corporate media, Americans are looking for reasons not to believe the official story. It's completely the reverse of what life was like back in the 1950s and 1960s at the height of the Cold War, where the U.S. government could say anything, no matter how ridiculous, and the majority of the American people would say, oh yes, that's what's going on, we believe you, take our money, take our children, save us from the evil commies. That world is gone. It is gone forever. And as I said, they had to be desperate to be trying this one.
Absolutely. And in this day and age, with the internet and the photos and the videos, every American, every news organization has the ability to launch their own investigation and point out where the official investigation is wrong. So there's no way that they could say, they could bring somebody out with the Boston bombing and say, "Is this man because he's in this picture standing at this area?" Because all those pictures are out there, and anybody can. And what are you going to do? Blur out everybody else and try to act like, oh, well, we're protecting our identity. All the photos are out there already. So I mean, they have really backed themselves into a corner with this one.
Well, the corporate media is never going to question the official government dogma. And again, with today being the second time in a row that the corporate media has put out these potential Middle Eastern-looking suspects, only to have to come back and say, well, they're not really suspects at all, this is really strike two on this whole official story. And it's basically 2 days in a row now. The entire American corporate media did not see, or to be more accurate, refused to see the obvious problems and inconsistencies with these official stories based on these photos. The most ridiculous of which is the idea that somebody who's just planted a bomb that is going to kill people is sticking around in the immediate vicinity and is then seen fleeing the scene after the bomb goes off. That is just absolutely not reality.
And the ultimate proof, this is the ultimate proof that the news media is not doing their own news gathering. They're getting it from someplace. They're getting it from a higher source. They're getting it from someplace, and they're all running with the same script because they chase each other around. Such and such at this news organization says one thing, and 30 seconds later, such and such at the next organization, and then they have to retract it, and it's showing just how hollow and how obsolete.
Okay, we got to take a break for commercials here. I mean, the independent media is doing journalism in the best traditions of Edward R. Murrow. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. Now, the two individuals whose photos appeared on the front of the New York Post today as potential suspects because they look Middle Eastern have now been identified. This is probably the reason why, once again, the corporate media is having to back off and say, oh, sorry, got the wrong people again. The two men that were proclaimed as potential suspects in the Boston Marathon bombing are actually a 24-year-old track coach and a teenage high school runner. Gee, I wonder why a track coach and a runner would be at the Boston Marathon. Boy, that's suspicious right there. Apparently, the high school kid works at a Subway, and they were there posting pictures on their Facebook accounts. So completely innocent. Why were they focused on? They look Middle Eastern. So we now know who they were, and frankly, these two guys have got a huge defamation lawsuit on their hands against the New York Post. And so they're now identified. Once again, the entire law enforcement mechanism is looking in the wrong direction. I want to know about these guys in the black coats, tan slacks, tan boots, who when they're standing together, it's obviously a uniform, no insignia. They're standing around after the bombing, not helping the victims, not doing anything that looks like investigation, and we just found a later photo where we see them exiting the scene. Who are these people? They're obviously not Boston Police Department. They're obviously not FBI. They're obviously not the bomb squad. Who are they? Because they're all wearing backpacks that could conceal pressure cooker bombs. So, anyway, let's see. We do not have a caller on the line. Phones are open, 800-313-9443, 800-313-9443. Now, getting back to the Mideast. Israel is now out there saying they are ready to act on the Syrian weapons. They're concerned that Syria's weapons could fall into the hands of bad people, meaning the Syrian government. So now Israel is talking about an unprovoked unilateral attack into Syria. They've already been shelling across the Golan. They've already flown into Syria and bombed Damascus. Now they're saying, we have to invade them. They made us invade them, Mommy. It wasn't my fault. I didn't want to be bad. They made us do it. Same thing we've been hearing. Meanwhile, Assad is out there publicly saying this so-called Syrian uprising is a Western plot. Gee, you think? We kind of already knew that one, Assad. Assad is now vowing that they are going to expunge all of these hired mercenaries from Syria. They've made some recent significant gains militarily. They've taken back control of a couple of key military bases. Yet another non-Syrian has been reported as killed inside Syria. This is an Australian up there fighting for the hired mercenary army. Meanwhile, we're seeing some very alarming messages coming out of the U.S. government regarding Iran. And again, these are stories that are not being reported on the TV news, which is still waving around the bloody shirts from Boston and the terrible tragedy that hit down in Texas. Secretary of Defense Chuck Hagel is saying that the U.S. can support Israel if Israel strikes Iran, which we kind of already knew, but they're selling that idea that if Israel does attack Iran, and yesterday they were talking about they may need to attack Iran to protect Israel. Best way to protect Israel is to attack Iran. And we saw that piece in the Atlantic where they were saying we should just give Israel more of these aerial tankers. Because if Israel has enough weapons to where they know they will be victorious, they're less likely to panic and attack Iran. And it's an absurd statement. The more weapons you give Israel, the more they use them on their neighbors. That's been their history. And it's complete hypocrisy because the whole rationale for disarming the American people is if the American people have guns, they'll be tempted to do bad things. But if we give more weapons to Israel, that will calm the situation down. It certainly never has in the past. And now we have word about this Senate resolution that was just passed that the United States will go to war with Iran if Israel attacks Iran. And we know the U.S. is desperate for any excuse to go into Iran, to shackle their oil to the U.S. dollar, to take down their state bank and put a private central bank in control, and Israel's just a convenient excuse. And so the U.S. Senate has basically said that Israel now has the decision on whether the United States will go to war with Iran. Because with this resolution, Israel can attack Iran, skedaddle back to Israel, and count on the United States to throw your sons and your daughters in the way of the Iranian retaliation, counterattack. Because those Israeli children are really far too precious to use as bullet stoppers. That's what the Americans are for. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. We're going to go to the phones. Chandler in Texas. Aloha, Chandler. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind today?
Hey, I was just calling to ask about Venezuela. Have there been any updates with that situation?
Well, basically,
the government still trying to...
The situation is was a very close election. The U.S. government is refusing to recognize the results of the election. The pro-U.S. opposition candidate has been caught engaging in fraud, trying to claim that the election was stolen from him. We know that the violence in the streets has been linked to these outside agitators that were coming into Venezuela before they closed the borders. The call for a general strike failed completely. I think the next step is the U.S. is hoping that the agent provocateurs will kick up enough violence in front of the press cameras where the U.S. can say, we have to intervene for humanitarian reasons. These poor Venezuelans, they don't have the government they elected, meaning they don't have the government the U.S. wants. So we're probably looking at a military intervention down there.
This is just ridiculous.
I agree.
I just want to tell you that I'm 19 and I live in Texas, and I'm just I appreciate the work that you do in our community as an alternative media source, and it's been teaching me a lot. And I was a Ron Paul supporter at first, and that's sort of how I've slowly made the transition to learn more and more about what history doesn't teach you in these schools and everything. And I just wanted to tell you that I appreciate you and keep up the good work, and God bless you.
Well, thank you very much, and I cannot tell you how delighted I am that younger and younger people are tuning into the independent media, because it's going to be your generation that has to pay for the failings of my generation. And, you know, I'm just absolutely delighted that young people are starting to pay attention to what's going on, because if there's going to be any chance to survive this crisis and to build a new nation, it's going to be your generation that's going to be living in it. And so I'm really I'm thrilled that young people like you are finally tuning into this stuff here. Thanks a lot for the phone call. We're going to switch over to Ed on the East Coast. Aloha, Ed. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Mike, how you doing?
Doing great.
Good. I love your show. I've been listening to you for probably about a year now.
Mm-hmm.
Listen, I just want to give you some figures real quick. They're simple. The bid on silver is $23.
Mm-hmm.
Ampex is selling it for $30, and they're buying it for $27.
Wow.
They're buying it for $7 over the bid. Now, I've never seen that before. They always buy slightly under what the closing bid was. You see what I mean?
No, yeah, that's normally the way it is. I mean, that melt value, the fix, they're buying below and selling above. That straddle, of course, is where they make their money as an operating business. But the fact that they're buying that high above the closing fix.
That's right. That's what. Oh, by the way, aloha, Michael.
Aloha.
I was over there 40 years ago. Met my wife.
Ah. What part?
And I was right there in Honolulu.
Okay.
I was stationed. I was a military man. I lived in Honolulu, and I was stationed at a base as a military man. But that young fellow that just called before you, I'm glad he's starting to read things. I try and get it across to other people here, and I say, look at the history books. They don't teach what our founding fathers did about standing armies and no central banks, et cetera, et cetera. None of what they said is in our history books. It's amazing.
It is amazing. I mean, starting in 1913, the Currency Act was dropped out of the curriculum. Now we're hearing that schools are teaching children the Second Amendment doesn't apply to them, that they don't have a right to... It's just complete brainwashing.
It happened down the street from me. When I say down the street, down the coast. A mother had gone into the bag of her little child, school child, pulled out some handwriting which looked like probably second or third grade, and on it it says, "I'm willing to do without some liberties to have safety and restrictions on the Second Amendment." The kid has no idea what that means, but that's putting the seed of rice in their head. You know what I mean? That's putting the idea in their head.
Exactly what it is. Our schools no longer educate; they indoctrinate.
I wish we'd go back there. Of course, I go back to the 40s and 50s when I was educated. We learned all about that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Now the kids don't even know who Thomas Paine was.
Yeah, it is rather amazing.
You know, I blame myself too. I've been saying it for years. I said our schools have purposely done this through the Department of Education.
Mm-hmm.
You know, this is how it works. The government sucks money out of us through federal income taxes. They start the Department of Education. The Department of Education insidiously, over time, goofs up the actual message of our history, our early beginnings in history.
Yep.
Right? And then they come back to the states and they say, well, we want you to teach this, and we want this textbook. And someplace down in Texas, they actually get these books. And because you're going to do that, we're going to give you $2 million. And all these unions, school teachers in these unions, just jump on that. Oh, it's just more money, you know what I mean, that they can spend. But that's how it works, through grants. And I say this about grants, Mike. A grant is nothing but money they took away from me I have to go back and beg for.
That's exactly what a grant is, and it's not just the government. The Carnegie Foundation for Education, it's in upstate New York. They have long espoused a policy that ordinary Americans should be taught no more education than they need to obey orders in the factories and fill out the various government forms, and anything above that is just going to confuse their poor little innocent minds.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yep, you're right, Mike. You're right. Hey, look, I'm going to let you go, and it's wonderful talking to you. And aloha. I might call again down the line.
That would be wonderful. Thank you very much. And again, this is why it was such a treat for that previous caller, 19 years old. It's telling us the young people are waking up. They realize they're going to inherit this country, and it is in really, really bad shape. And they're not happy about it. And I don't blame them for not being happy about it. And again, I view it as the highest moral imperative that we leave to future generations a better nation than that which was left to us. And my generation has failed that task. And that's not a very pleasant thought to be looking at. All righty, let's see. We've got Carrie in Florida. Aloha, Carrie. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Carrie dropped.
Carrie dropped. All righty. I want to talk about the gun bill. As you're probably aware, in the middle of Boston and the rest of it, the gun bill that was in the Senate was voted down, actually went down by an even wider margin than the worst-case scenario people were predicting. Obama's out there screaming at the Senate, how dare you do this, how dare you do that. I have a reminder for this president who claims that he used to be a constitutional scholar. The purpose of the Congress is to listen to the American people. The job of the president is to execute the will of the Congress. That's why it's called the executive branch. The president does not create the law and browbeat the Congress to put it through. Did you see that press conference yesterday when Obama was, oh, how could the Senate do this to me? And Joe Biden was standing there with a pout on his face, his arms crossed. He was looking like Walter from Jeff Dunham, the ventriloquist. Remember the character Walter just scowling at everybody? That's what Joe Biden looked like yesterday. And we're already seeing over here on the media in between Boston and in between Texas, they're starting to come on back, the push to grab the guns, and they're parading out all these people who lost family at Virginia Tech and Newtown, and they're saying, oh, the guns are bad, we've got to grab the guns. Look, if you don't like guns, don't own any. Perfect solution here. But you do not have the right to tell me that I, as a law-abiding citizen, should give up my guns. Common sense says that if you live in a nation where the police are not willing to intervene in violent crimes, as we do here in the United States, when we have the courts saying police are under no obligation to intervene to save you from a violent crime, common sense, over and above the Second Amendment, says we, the American people, have a legitimate right and need to keep and bear arms equal, if not superior, to those in the hands of the criminals. And we know the criminals have all these guns that the gun grabbers want to grab. And the criminals will never give those guns up. They smuggle them in. They steal them from stores and police cars. They steal them from gun owners' homes that were so conveniently listed by those articles in the New York media about, oh, where the gun owners live, and it triggered a rash of burglaries. There is no legitimate reason to deny us having weapons stronger than those of the criminals. There just isn't. All right, we've got Carrie in, I forget the city. Aloha, Carrie. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Michael. I'm calling just to compliment you on the way you call our soldiers children. I signed my papers in 1969 when I was 17, not having a clue of what was to come. And I've been PO'd ever since. And to sacrifice our young men and on a few occasions women that don't belong there for this state of the world that we're in, controlled by Satan, of course. But it's just horrific, and I'm glad you realize that they are all children. They know no different. Otherwise, they certainly, pardon me, they certainly wouldn't be there.
That's absolutely true. They've been raised on a diet of movies that glorify war and computer games that glorify war, and the government tells them it's okay for you to go out and commit these atrocities. Somebody wrote a humorous piece the other day about they should be sending us old guys out there to fight the wars, because we're already, we don't have much longer to live anyway. We've got generally bad dispositions because of all of our bad joints and our little ailments and stuff like that. We already know how to shoot guns, but we're too smart to fall for the propaganda out there. And again, it is our children. They're taking these young people, after 18 years of raising them to be decent human beings and members of society, they run them through basic training to turn them into monsters. They throw them out against the rest of the world. And it's important to remember when we talk about all these kids who are dying in these war zones, what if these kids, had they been allowed to live, might not have gone on to really do something that would have improved the world. Invent new energy sources. Find a real cure for cancer. Find a way to basically get rid of private central banking and build a new economy that works for everybody. What if one of these people was going to come up with a true way for the world to live together in peace? Solve the water shortage, solve the energy shortage. These wars are not just murdering the present, they are murdering our future.
Well, yes, and when the 19-year-old young man phoned in, they're going to have a heck of a rebuilding job when he's 30 or 40. He's going to, hopefully he'll survive. But these people, the teenagers today, are going to have to rebuild us, and it's not going to be easy.
Well, we're working on a blueprint for them to follow right now.
Well, we're trying.
Yes, we are. Okay, I've got to let you go. We're running out of time. The phone lines are jammed up. Dan in Philadelphia. Aloha, Dan. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
How are you? Listen, I noticed at Republican Broadcasting, there was a article there about 16% drop in 16% drop in the markets, the manipulation of the markets, the metals.
Mm-hmm.
That there was a landslide in the copper mines over there in Utah. Are you familiar with that article?
Yeah, I'm familiar with that, yes.
Okay, do you have access to Google?
I do, but we're running out of time. If you want me to look at Google and something, I'll
get to the point. The point is, when you get the opportunity, go look at it right away. Look at that area on the Google map, and look at the area that actually fell down, and you'll see a bunch of drill holes.
Mm-hmm.
Those were planted charges. That was actually caused to fall down into that mine.
Okay.
In other words,
first of all, a couple of points here you need to keep in mind. The images you see in Google Earth or Google Maps are not current. Some of them can be as old as 2 years. So there's no real timing involved there. Second, drilling holes and setting off charges is how you break up the rock in those open pit mines. I don't think anybody intended to deliberately destroy this mine and its output. It's another industrial accident caused by money junkies cutting corners on safety procedures. And that's all it is. John in Virginia. Aloha, John. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind? John, are you there?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. What's on your mind?
The 19-year-old guy, I just want, if he's still listening, I admire him very much because it is a very rare avis at that age that understands or he will even consider that the wise elders of our society would commit human life to a life and death struggle for lies. And most people at that age would never even dream of that. And I wanted to compliment him for his maturity.
I'm in agreement. That one phone call has given me cause for more hope than I felt in a long, long time.
Me too, Mike. Really. And the other thing you were talking about, I think this might be the first war that's won by the old guys. It's all going to be brain power.
Oh, right, yes. As I've been saying all along, this revolution will not be won with guns and bombs. It is being won with keyboards. Absolutely. All right. Going to let you go and switch over. We're going to start with Glenn in Philadelphia. May have to take you into the last segment. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. I think you just hit on something. You were just describing the executive office as being, there to execute the will of the people as expressed through the legislation produced in Congress. But I think this is the crux of the semantic problem. Execute. Obama thinks it's his job to execute people, not the will of the people.
Ah, yes, very much so.
Yeah, I think that's it. All we have to do is get somebody to explain to him on some Tuesday morning that I'm not really there to execute people. He's there to make things happen.
That's what the president does. The president presides nominally over the Senate, although that's delegated to the vice president. John Adams called it the most boring job in the world. But yeah, the proper constitutional role of the executive branch is to execute the will of the Congress after it has been judged as constitutional by the judicial branch. That is the way the government was set up. The presidents over the last several administrations have started abusing the executive order. Instead of carrying out the will of the Congress, they're using it as stroke of the pen law of the land. And that is definitely not what it was for. Congress should have held them to account, but they did not. Got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show, and we're watching on the corporate media. There's a new FBI briefing regarding the Boston bombing, in which the FBI is proclaiming they will release video of 2 new gentlemen who are now considered suspects in the Boston bombing. And I don't need to wait to see the video. It's going to be 2 more guys who look Middle Eastern. We already know that's what's going to happen. And that's going to be their strike 3. Because that's all that has been shoved at us since this bombing. Saudi, 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 Middle Eastern, Middle Eastern, Middle Eastern. And here out in the real world, in the independent media, we all want to know who these guys in the black and tan are. And we're seeing this pop up all over. Natural News is already out there saying, who were these guys? Standing individually, you wouldn't notice them because of the nondescript outfit they're in. But standing together, it's obvious it's a uniform. No insignia. Who are these guys? And they're all carrying these backpacks big enough to hide pressure cooker bombs in. One of them had a photo with a strange electronic device. I don't know what it is. Somebody speculated it was a radiation detector. I don't know. Could have been a remote control. We don't know who these guys are. They were obviously being left alone by the police and the bomb squad. And like I said, we just had a picture surface showing them leaving the scene of the bombing. Not helping the victims, not looking for evidence. They're on their way out. I guess the job is over. It's Miller time. So they're coming back. You know, the FBI, they blew it yesterday, saying they had an arrest. They had to let that guy go. This morning they're saying, here's a picture of 2 more guys we think are suspects because they look Middle Eastern. Now they've had to back off of them. We've identified who those guys really are. It's a track coach and a high school running student. Gee, why are they at the Boston Marathon? That's suspicious. And now the FBI is saying, well, we've got another video with 2 more guys we think are the suspects. And without seeing the video, I can already guarantee they're going to look Middle Eastern. Because that's the agenda. And that'll be strike 3. Meanwhile, we're seeing some very alarming stories coming out in the aftermath of yesterday's Senate defeat of the gun bill. Joe Biden is out there saying the president is going to use executive actions, executive orders to grab the guns. He's just going to order the guns to be seized. Obama is out there vowing gun control without Congress. Mr. President, you have no authority without the authority of Congress. As the executive branch, your job is confined to executing the will of the Congress, and Congress's job is to listen to the will of the people. Considering you proclaim yourself a constitutional scholar, you seem to have it completely backwards, that you can just say what you want, Congress will rubber stamp it, and the American people will just sort of go along because, after all, you are the president. It doesn't work that way. You are the president only when you operate within the limits of your office imposed by the Constitution. If you don't like those limits, find another line of work. All right. It's obvious the gun grab is back on, even without the Congress, even without the will of the people. This is going to get ugly. I'm still very concerned about another big bang for tomorrow to blame on those ultra-right-wing, Christian, conservative, gun-loving, gay-hating, blah, 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 blah. So please, until tomorrow, stay safe, stay alert, share what you know with who you know. Please spread the word of Republic Broadcasting and WhatReallyHappened.com. We'll see you tomorrow. Aloha, America.